1. So I'm 48 years old. This happened when I was around 15 or 16 years old. A lot of the details have been lost due to the time that has passed, but I remember most of it. It was late spring around 1987 in Pinellas Park. School was almost over for the year, and I was excited for summer and endless beach days. I was working after school every day at one of the oldest ice cream shops near the beach on Gulf to Bay Boulevard. It's still there. I believe it's called the Dairy Curl. As an aspiring musician, I had surrounded my personal life with like-minded people, and would spend every waking moment playing guitar or learning guitar. One person I was playing with was quite older than me. Our relationship was strictly platonic, and we were great friends. She was a brilliant writer and very much into psychic phenomena, playing with Ouija boards and tarot cards. We had used the board a few times, and she had given me a few readings. One Friday night, we had made plans for a few friends to meet at her house and party, smoke a little weed and play some music after I got off work. The day was normal, school, and serving ice cream to tourists and beachgoers. This was the place to stop on the way back after a long day of sun. And it was definitely a hot spring and the start of summer. We were very busy that night. At around 9 p.m., we started to close up shop, cleaning the outside seating areas and floors and all the shit that goes along with shutting down an ice cream shop. My friend Monica, whom I was speaking of earlier, was tasked with picking me up after work. Around 9:15, she pulled up with her friend Lisa in this early 80s, late 70s green station wagon we called the Grocery Getter, or the Green Beast, and it was very apparent by the sound of the exhaust that she has just shown up. I quickly made them both some milkshakes to hold them off, as I would be another 30 minutes cleaning before I could clock out. I ran the shakes out to them, only to find them laying on their backs on the huge hood of the station wagon, looking at the sky. I handed them their shakes, and asked them about their day, and why they were on the hood of the car and not inside the car in the cold AC. Monica pointed out a cloud in the sky which was fairly clear, and plenty of stars out. She explained that this cloud had followed them from their house in Pinellas Park all the way to Clearwater Beach. I scoffed and looked at the cloud, and explained that it looked like a spotlight from one of the many clubs near that area that usually use them on the weekends to attract customers. I blew it off, as I had already explained what it was, and went about my business. I finished cleaning and grabbed the guitar I always carried with me, and my school backpack, and headed to the car, only to find them in the exact same positions. When I walked outside, I laughed that they were still telling me this cloud, which was still there by the way, had followed them. I once again laughed it off, and we all climbed into the car. Now, I was kind of paying attention to the cloud at this point, because, well, it was still there, and at this point I realized how close it actually was when I had time to look at it in detail. It seemed to be about 100 to 200 feet away, in the northeast sky. Monica backed the car out of the parking lot and pulled out to the exit of the ice cream shop, and made a right on Gulf to Bay Boulevard. As we made the right and headed east towards Belcher Road, I began to suspect that the cloud indeed was following us. Kind of blowing it off like the moon follows you in the sky, but noticing this was different. We traveled a few miles. I believe our turn was about 3 to 4 miles up, where we would be making a right and heading south on Belcher Road toward Pinellas Park. The cloud was beginning to look a lot less like a cloud and more like a mist to me. It was clearly following us. It wasn't until we made the right onto Belcher Road when it made the right turn with us, and now was sitting at about 75 to 100 feet from my window, and it followed us. As we passed East Bay Road and approached Ulmerton, I began to freak out. It then split into 4 separate mists. They rotated each other, coming back into one piece. My freaking out got way more intense, and the hairs on my body were standing straight out. I could feel it. I could feel this thing paying attention to me, focusing on me. I lost it, started to scream at it. "What do you want? What do you want from me?" Monica was telling me to calm down. It wasn't there to hurt anyone. I honestly didn't feel it was there to hurt anyone either, but I was still scared, and I mean scared. After a few more miles, we made a left off to Belcher onto like 94th or 82nd. I forget the turn now, but I continued to lose it. As we got closer to the house, it was really close. and I clammed up and crawled between the front seats and the rear seats, and hunkered down on the floor sobbing like a baby. This thing made me feel... I'm not sure what the feeling was, but it was doing it to me. Not them, but to me, and I could feel its energy coursing through me, and I've never felt that since with anything. When we arrived at Monica's house, I immediately exited the car and ran into the house. I glanced back and saw it, and it was really close, 50 feet, I would say. As I entered the house, out of breath, teary-eyed and still obviously panicked, I tried to explain what was going on, and my friends immediately went toward the front door. As Monica and Lisa were walking in, they said, "It's gone, Kip. It literally disappeared the second you shut the front door." It took me a while to calm down, and a few beers and maybe a joint or two made me relax more. That night is still stuck in the back of my mind, and soon it was not the topic of conversation, and we partied the night away and played music till early morning. The next morning I had to go home. I was living at my mom's house at the time, in a neighborhood on the corner of Belcher and Ulmerton, in Largo, Florida. Monica and I had some coffee. I packed my stuff while everyone slept, and she took me home. Everyone loved my mother. She passed in '96 from cancer. She was the neighborhood mom. When we arrived at my house, Monica came in to hang for a minute and say hello. Mom had breakfast in, and we sat down to have some food. Monica brought up the night before and said you should tell your mom what happened, so I explained what happened. She sat silently, while tears welled up in her eyes. Now, my mom was the type of person that cried at an HOA Mark commercial, so this wasn't out of the ordinary, bless her heart. But when I finished, she said she has something to tell me, and this is her story. When she was little, her grandfather had died suddenly from a massive heart attack, and they were broke, living in the mountains of West Virginia. They had a small coal mine on the property that my great-grandfather would mine, and sell the coal at the bottom of the hill to the coal company or to other residents that needed coal for heat. When he passed, they had nothing. They knew, though, that he was a penny pincher and saved every dime. He had money somewhere, they just didn't know where. And they were starving, living off beans and greens from the modest plot of land they farmed. One night, a couple of weeks after he passed, they were all sitting by the fire and talking. She explained that it was late and there was a knock on the door. During these times, if there was an unannounced visit, something was wrong. My great-grandmother told the kids to go upstairs and stay there. My mother, being the curious one and the oldest, hid at the bottom of the stairs and watched. This is what she said. When her granny opened the door, there was a cloud. It sat there, and she calmly asked what it wanted. She followed the cloud outside, and as she did, my mother went to the window to watch. She said the cloud went to a tree and simply vanished. Granny walked back to the house and didn't say a word. The next day, she woke my mother up early to help, told her to go to the shed and grab a shovel. They both walked to the tree, and Granny started digging. About a foot down, she hit something metal. And they kept digging, pulling about 4 coffee cans out of the soil. They opened the cans one by one, and there was my great-grandfather's life savings. The whole time she was telling the story, the same feeling I had the night before returned. She told me that it was her grandfather watching out for them, and that this cloud was my great-grandfather watching out for me and letting us know he's still there. Now, I don't know if that's a fact, but it sure does make sense. Anyway, that's my story. I've never seen the cloud or mist again, but I have a feeling before my time is over on this earth, I'll see it again. 2. I was with my girlfriend preparing dinner. The year was 2015. Everything seemed normal. I put on some music, and the speakers were in my room. We were cooking. I noticed that the music was no longer being listened to. I was surprised that something happened with the internet because it was Spotify. I went to the bedroom, and I noticed that the playlist continued, but the volume knob had been set to 0. I didn't pay much attention to it at that moment. I set the knob again and went to the kitchen to continue with dinner. Not even 2 minutes passed when again I noticed that no music was being heard. This time it seemed something strange to me. I lived alone, and we were just my girlfriend and I. I went into my room, and this time the knob was set on 1, so I could lightly hear some music. I was surprised because it was a physical and not digital fault. Again, I turned the knob and returned to the kitchen. I tried not to think about that and concentrate on cooking when suddenly I clearly heard things on the floor, this time in the studio that was next to my room. It bothered me, the idea of passing by these things instead of enjoying a pleasant evening with my girlfriend. I asked her if she had heard that sound, and she said no. I replied that it was clearly a noise from the studio, so she told me let's take a look. In fact, there were things on the floor. I wanted to think that it had simply fallen. We picked them up, turned off the lights, and left. We were in the kitchen again when we heard another noise. This time she could also appreciate it. I told her something is happening, and she, being a very religious person, told me not to worry. We went to the studio, and this time the light was on, and there were again some things thrown away. There were no open windows or wind currents. It seemed very strange to us. We lifted everything, and before leaving, I pronounced aloud that I will leave the light on, and we retired kind of nervous. We had not reached the kitchen when noises were heard again. This time I was really afraid that it was a thief who had entered the house. We ran to the study, and the light was off, and a TV that was in there was on with static. We looked at each other, and I told her that it's not normal, that something was happening, and we should do something. She proposed we pray. We went to the kitchen. She took my hands. We said 2 prayers that she knew, and when we finished, something was heard again. I wanted to go see, but I was shocked to see that just outside the kitchen there was an inflatable toy that I used to have to punch for fun on the studio. It was horrible. I had no idea how it got there. I felt very scared, and I did not know if it was something paranormal, or a person entered the house and was playing the worst joke ever. My girlfriend asked me what was wrong with me, why I stood at the door. I told her not to leave the kitchen, and I did not want her to see that. But she leaned out and screamed. I tried to calm her down. Nothing had ever happened in that house. We were very scared, and at that moment the bell rang. I answered on the intercom, and nothing. Every time I was more nervous, but I tried to stay calm. I walked towards her, and the bell rang again. I answered, and nothing. I told her, let's get out of here. Something or someone is bothering us. It occurred to me to go in the house of a cousin who lived nearby, and then the lights started to blink. It was horrible. Getting to the street was a great relief, and by the way, it was completely desolate. We walked a few blocks until we reached my cousin's house. We told her everything while our hands were still shaking. She believed us and said she had some holy water and that we had to go back to the house. What had happened to us was not normal. When we came back with the holy water, you could hear loud music from the street. We opened the door with fear, and immediately my cousin began to sprinkle holy water all over the place. The inflatable toy was in another place. It seemed that it had moved a few meters from where we saw it the last time. The knob of the speakers was at maximum, and all the lights in the house were on. It seemed that they had a small party without us. It was horrible. Note: on the Spotify browser was written reggaeton, and the first playlist was playing. I hate reggaeton music. I never put that kind of music on before. I don't even know how to spell it. I was never a skeptic of the paranormal, but I did not believe everything I'd heard until that night. For my good luck, I can say that after using the holy water, nothing else happened in that house. I no longer live there. I threw the toy away, and that girlfriend is now my wife. And we know that that was all real. These spirits or entities exist, and we must be careful, have faith in God, and not let them disturb us. Three. I'll say this to start off: I'm an avid Goodwill shopper. Half the furniture in my room and my closet is from Goodwill. That said, nothing like this had ever happened to me before. And in the years that it's been since this happened, I've had no experiences. I was shopping casually one day when I came across something I thought was cool. A framed pressed flower on an old-looking piece of paper, with faded, elegant handwriting below it spelling out the scientific name for the flower. The picture frame looked like it had been painted over with purple nail polish, and was much, much larger than the paper in a way that was eye-drawing, but kind of off-center. I would have put it back down, except the flowers looked like forget-me-nots, which are my all-time favorite flower. So I spent the $3 on that, as well as $3 on a smaller, more modern-style picture frame. My original goal was to put the flower and paper into the other frame and hang it up, but as soon as I arrived home it became apparent that wasn't going to happen. The brown paper on the back of the purple frame was ripped already, and so when I finished ripping it off, I realized the picture frame was not only stapled shut, but nailed. I guess I could have spent the extra 45 minutes digging out all the nails and staples, but I didn't. I'm lazy. I just hung it up the way it was. For 2 straight weeks, every single night, that picture frame would fall off the wall. It didn't matter how I hung it up. Stick on hook, thumbtacks, actual hooks, even nails. It would be on my floor by the morning, occasionally waking me from my sleep when it fell. Some of the times when I woke up, I would hear rustling in the walls, like an animal was moving around in there. I would get up and put my ear to the wall, trying to follow the sound, so I could tell my dad where to look in the morning. My dad never found anything, but I was so sure something was moving in there, he called for a professional pest guy. The pest guy didn't find any droppings or signs of life, but he agreed to leave a couple traps in the attic. Before I explain this next part, let me lay out my room for you guys. It was a pretty big room, and considering I only had a twin bed pressed against the wall farthest from the door, despite being 5'10", the room seemed even bigger. The window was directly over my bed, and I like to keep my blinds open because I like natural light and looking at the moon when I sleep. There's also a sister bathroom attached to another identical room, on the same wall as the entrance. If you go deeper into the bathroom where the toilet is, there's a door to the attic. There's a fair amount of space in there, but I only went in there when I had to, because there were little tunnels and pockets of darkness that led into the walls of the house. It creeped me out. That's where the pest guy set the traps, and yet I would check them every morning and find nothing. It was even more frustrating when the noises started happening earlier in the day or at twilight, increasing in frequency. And there was this horrible stench I cannot explain that seemed to be coming from the walls now too, and to be honest, about 11 days in, I adjusted and grew noseblind to it, and it only bothered me a little. I only remember how bad it was when someone else entered my room, because they would recoil or comment on it, and they typically didn't stay for long. Around the 2-week period mark, I realized I was dealing with raccoons in my wall. I had woken up to a knocking sound this time, like someone was banging on my door in the middle of the effing night. I yelled out, "Just give me a second," and put on some pants, and the almost panic-sounding banging stopped. I opened my bedroom door to no one, and despite being a scaredy cat through and through, I was so sure it was someone in my family that I checked the whole house. Turned on every light, and woke up my dad and sister, who were apparently sleeping soundly, to ask what was wrong. Then I double-checked the locks and doors, grabbed a knife, scaredy cat, okay, and went back to my room cautiously. Something about even stepping into that room made the hairs on the back of my neck stand, triggered my fight or flight, so try as I did, I could not fall back asleep. I sat stock still listening for anything. I finally allowed myself to lay back and get comfortable. Not 10 minutes later, I heard it. A fainter knocking. It wasn't coming from my door, though. No, it was coming from my walls. I did not stay in there long enough to investigate after that realization. No siree, I flew out of that room. I went and slept with my little sister in her room. She was freaked out already from my shaking her awake and didn't mind me sleeping in there anyway. The following day before school, I had to go back in there to change. It smelled worse than I imagined. Maybe because I hadn't slept in there. I ignored the smell. I ignored the rustling. I spent about 3 minutes getting ready, and then booked it. By the time I got back from school, I wasn't just scared, I was angry. If that was some kind of spirit like I thought it might be, it had no business kicking around in my room like it thought it was the boss. It couldn't hurt me if I wasn't afraid. Probably. So as soon as I got home, I went straight into my room, cleaned up for a bit, I rehung my flower, and then I turned off the light and I sat on my bed, waiting. I waited until it started for about an hour until something made me sit up. I couldn't tell you exactly what. It's not like it got colder or even darker. It was only just reaching dusk and my window still illuminated my room completely. And I had fairy lights hanging over a desk in the corner, but it felt darker, if that makes sense. The air felt heavy. I sat up and strained my ears until I heard a faint knock. First on one wall, then a second one closer to me, and then one farther away from my desk, so I did the most stereotypical thing you can do, and I was like, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Nothing. Even the knocking stopped. And then I did something I regret a little, because it confirmed my theory that it wasn't an animal. I said, "If someone's there, turn off my lights." I pointed to the fairy lights, but didn't see anything happen at first. Then, just long enough to make me roll my eyes at myself, they turned off. I told the spirit to leave, that this was my room and they weren't welcome there. It actually made me feel better, made the air lighter. I went downstairs and ate dinner. When I came back to go to bed, the picture frame was on the ground. This time the fall had broken the glass and frame pretty bad. I cleaned up the glass, propped the thing by my wall, and chilled in there until I didn't feel afraid anymore. Eventually I went to bed. That night was the first and last time I have ever experienced sleep paralysis. I woke up in the dark, sleeping on my stomach, my face at an angle, facing the bathroom door and my desk. I couldn't see the door to my room or the wall where I hung the picture. I wasn't panicked at first. I knew I couldn't move, but I was relieved I had escaped my dream, though I can't remember what it had been now. But when I realized I wasn't alone, I couldn't see anything. But I knew I wasn't. I could feel the presence, distinctly male presence, and I could feel the darkness in the room intensify. The shadows cast from the window move on my wall, and him, approached me. I stared at the bathroom door, knowing if I could just move my fingers or my toes, could just jump-start my limbs into action, I could get away. But I couldn't. The bed pressed in on both sides of my bed by my feet, like someone had put their hands on either side of my feet, and then, bit by bit, I felt those invisible hands crawl farther and farther upward, could feel warm breath on my calves while I lay frozen in terror. I saw the bed move with my own eyes, right by my tilted head. It compressed like someone was putting pressure on it, but there was nothing there. The warm breath expelled straight onto my neck. It touched my hip, its hand bigger than the span of my back, bigger than any hand I've ever seen. It wasn't sexual or anything, but it was something pretty close to it. It was possessive. I couldn't see the thing, but I could feel it. I could feel its intent. It didn't feel aggressive or violent, but it felt evil, malicious, and most of all, it felt smug. I think if I had seen its face, it would have been smiling. And that scared me so much that I finally jerked away from its hold, stumbled to the bathroom, to the next bedroom, literally unable to stop screaming until I was down the stairs. My dad and both my sisters rushed towards me, freaking out. I immediately burst into tears. I told them what happened when I finally calmed down enough. My oldest sister was quick to say it was just a dream, a scientifically explainable occurrence, but my dad and my little sister were a little more willing to believe it was a ghost. We'd grown up hearing stories about my dad's haunted house, and we, to this day, are all believers. I threw away the picture a week later, a solid week of sleeping on the couch. I thought long and hard about it when it started, but it didn't take much deduction to conclude whatever spirit was haunting me was attached to that frame. As I threw it away, I noticed the entire inside of the frame was coated in this sticky, slimy red substance, and it smelled horrible, just like my room had. It was impossible to wash the stuff off too. It took me a good 10 minutes, and a lot of wasted water. Some other creepy stuff happened, even after I moved out, but it wasn't nearly that bad. As much as I hate to be that person, as soon as I got interested in Quakerism and became more religious, all of those problems stopped entirely. What I do think is interesting is why I made this post. I moved out of my dad's house with a friend and had to move back in at the start of COVID. About 4 months into it, I became more religious, and it was like a weight was lifted off my chest. At the same time, 3 things happened I think are worth noting, even though they didn't scare me, the last one I found out today. 1, my dad and his employee turned my old bedroom into an office when I moved out. In the same week that I started feeling more like myself, Ben, the employee, came down the stairs looking extremely uncomfortable with a stack of papers in his hand. It was a stack of printed paper that had apparently come out of the printer. It was a slideshow my little sister had made for school back in 9th grade. It was printing out the pages in a loop over and over again. Ben had turned off the printer multiple times, but it just kept turning back on and printing the pages out. Apparently it had been doing that all week, he said, and it was starting to scare him. But the funny thing is, the printer has been broken for almost a year. We could never get it to work or even turn on, and we even had another printer at that point. My dad just never got around to throwing it away. It was also late summer by that point, and my sister was just about to enter 10th grade. 2. Not 5 minutes after he said that, we hear a loud crash and 2 screams from upstairs. While my sister and her friend were in the bathroom, somehow her 50-pound giant mirror had crashed onto the floor and shattered into a million pieces. It had been leaning against the wall, and it would take a lot of strength to knock that thing over. It's not something that happens on accident. Both Ben and the friend left pretty quickly after that, freaked out, though Ben did a better job of concealing it. 3. My dad has had sleep paralysis too, once and only once. He just told me about it, and as he told me, I got this unsettling feeling. It was within a 2-week period of the mirror incident. So what if I never really got rid of the spirit? What if it had followed me, lost its grip on me, and was looking for a new host? My sister is the most depressed she's ever been in her life, just like I had been when I moved out. I felt like I was going crazy. If you listen until the end, thanks. Let me know your thoughts. 4. In 1999, I moved back to Washington State from traveling around the country for 4 years. My grandmother let me move in with her for a while so I could get back on my feet again. I hated the basement of her house, always have, but it was rent-free, and she was cool with Chuck, my 90-pound black lab. Plus my grandma and I got along pretty well. Late one night, about 3 months in, I woke up because Chuck was moving around on the bed and kept shaking the mattress. Then I heard him start grumping. You know those grumpy groans old dogs make when you scratch behind their ears, and they love it. He started doing that. Once I realized what I was hearing, I started to yell at him to go back to sleep. That's when I discovered the reason he was moving around so much. He was trying to get closer to the woman standing right next to my bed, scratching him behind the ear. I didn't scream, and I'm proud of that. But also, what the actual fuck? Where did she come from? Who was she? Why the hell was she standing in my room petting my dog at 3 a.m.? I was too scared to ask. I did the only thing I knew how to do in these situations. I hid under the blanket. Certainly, she would be gone by the time I re-emerged from under the blanket. That's how these things are supposed to work, right? I waited for a little while, but when I came out from under the blanket, she was still there. So I hid under the blanket again 3 more times. Every time I came back out, she'd still be there, smiling at me and scratching my dog's ears. The last time I was under the covers, I realized that I wasn't actually afraid of the woman. Chuck and I met under stressful situations for both of us, and because of that, he and I had a super strong bond. I trusted him implicitly. If she'd meant me harm, he would have reacted to her negatively. His reaction was clearly positive, so I figured that she probably wasn't there to kill me. So I came out from under the blanket one last time, intending to deal with the freaky woman still standing right next to my bed. Somehow I decided that turning on the light would make her disappear. I reached over and snapped the bedside lamp on. I don't know why I thought that would work. Is that even a thing? Are ghosts supposed to disappear in the light? Well, I turned on the light and she didn't, so I don't think that's a thing. By then, she'd been standing at my bedside petting Chuck for several minutes, and I was out of ghost-busting options, so I gave up on being terrified and just looked at her. Really looked at her. I can still see her right now in my mind, dressed up in a classy brown pantsuit with a cream-colored blouse. She had shoulder-length auburn hair, styled beautifully with these big, loopy curls. She looked like she'd been on her way to a work party, and she only stopped by for a second to say hello. She was very pretty. She looked happy. I didn't have the nerve to talk to her, or at least I don't remember speaking. But I stayed present, and we looked at each other for a while. I remember having the distinct impression of her knowing I was there, of both of us being aware of the other. Then she stopped petting Chuck and walked to the end of my bed, stood up straight and proud, and dissolved away. I mean that very literally, first her clothes, then her skin, organs and bones, like that Nazi at the end of Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. I remember what her blood looked like as it dissolved away to reveal her skeleton. That should be a gross, terrifying memory, but I don't remember it like that. At the time, it felt like she was doing it on purpose, like she'd wanted to leave with the most dramatic exit she could manage. I remember thinking, this should scare the pants off of me, but also, wow. Somehow I got back to sleep. In the morning over coffee. I was going to tell my grandmother about what happened, but she had just received an upsetting phone call. Apparently her best friend from high school, Ursula, had passed away in the middle of the night. I'd heard stories about their teenage shenanigans, especially the one about the stolen birthday cake, but I never saw a picture of Ursula, so I asked what she looked like. I couldn't tell you what she looked like these days, but when we were young, she had the most beautiful, curly, auburn hair. That's not the only weird thing that happened in my grandmother's basement, but it remains the most vivid and least scary. Five. When I was 14, back in 2007, my dad bought a brand new Toyota Camry. We traveled to Jeddah for a few days. On our way back, it was just past midnight. There were almost no cars around on both sides of the highway. An old Mercedes and an 18-wheeler were behind us. In the car was me, my mom, and dad was driving. We were chatting and laughing. We just ran out of topics, and I decided to lie down in the back seat. Within 5 seconds, I heard a loud bang and passed out for a few seconds. When I got my senses back, I tried to sit up, but the car felt like a roller coaster on the rise, so I struggled a little. When I sat up, I grabbed the shoulders of both the driver's and passenger seats. I realized that the car was in mid-air floating, and looking out through my window, I saw that our car was at the same height of the window of the 18-wheeler. After a few seconds of floating, the car began to descend, and once again, it felt like a roller coaster. My mom realized that my dad wasn't wearing a seatbelt, just like her. She firmly put one hand on the dashboard and another arm stretched across my dad's chest, so that he didn't hit his face on the steering wheel when the car dropped to the highway. When the car dropped, the front bumper dismantled and slid past the right window of the car. The 18-wheeler and the Mercedes did not stop for us, they just flew past us. At an even higher speed, probably freaked out by what they witnessed. The car started to run at very high speed, and my dad and I freaked out due to the situation. My mom was insisting that he stop the car as soon as possible. We stopped at the fast lane on the highway. Luckily, there was a gas station on the other side of the road, and on our side was a building which looked like a government office, so we had some visibility. We rushed out of the car, and realized there was no car anywhere, and our front left tire burst. My dad was bleeding from his nose injury due to the first hit on the steering wheel when the tire burst. Suddenly, my mom and I had an eerie feeling, and witnessed two dark, gigantic figures walking away. A part of the illumination from the gas station seemed to get dimmer. I thought I was hallucinating, but my mom asked me if I was seeing something or not. I replied yes. The figures were like Godzilla's size, but fully black in color. Seconds after those things walked away into the dark of the desert, the brightness of the gas station seemed to be normal again, and the car started to pass by on both sides of the highway. We managed to stop a couple of cars by waving our phone lights, and the police were called. The police couldn't believe what happened. 3 cars arrived. When we asked for a hospital, they said the building in front of us is a hospital. We were taken there and given treatment. The next day a detective spoke to us, and he said that this part of the highway is haunted. A lot of bizarre accidents happen, and so the government decided to build a hospital as an effort to save some lives. A few years later, that highway was shut down due to the rising number of fatalities. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 217. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. And before we go on, I'd like to give an extra special shout out to Chuck from Story 4, who is the goodest, bestest dog in the world. And also a shout out to Chuck's owner. They didn't ask for one, they just wanted one for Chuck, but the name is Snickerpants, and I have to take the opportunity to say Snickerpants whenever possible. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.